Hi, I'm at the Etrailer. Today we're going to be talking about the Terran telescoping dining table. Now this will be great if you're looking for a table to not only act as a table, but to save you space and be pretty adaptable for your needs. Then this can be a great option for you. So let's check it out. Now if you have any experience with this table, let us know how you like it in either a comment or review, and even snap a picture of it in your space to kind of let everyone know how it's working. But if you don't have experience with it, today we're going to be going over some of the major features about it, what makes it stand out. Afterwards, then I'll install it and talk about some tips and tricks on how to do that. And there's a lot to this table. It's pretty adaptable for your needs, so no matter who you're sitting with, you're going to have plenty of space to sit down, enjoy yourself, have a meal. But that's only half the story here. This can also convert to a bed. So if you have any of the kids with you or your grandkids with you, you simply just have to move these cushions out of the way and lower this into place. And honestly, that's one of the big appeals for me. It's just how versatile it is. And all you gotta do is lower those cushions back down, and then you have yourself a bed. And to be honest with you, I'd probably keep it in this position most of the time, since it is going to take up less space comparatively to the other position. It's also going to be perfect on those rainy days or those days you just kind of want to relax inside, maybe catch up on the news. You can do that, and you can even pull this out to act as a little stand for your drinks, your phone, whatever it be, so you can be pretty comfortable. And as you saw me just a few seconds ago, is laying on here with my full weight. I feel pretty confident with this to hold me too, because this thing's going to be built pretty well. And speaking of that construction, we can take a closer look at it once I lift this up. And speaking of which, the way I lift this up is just by pulling a handle here. Makes it super easy. It's just going to use a hydraulic system to do that. Now when we are talking about that in construction, I do need to point out that this table itself, this is actually the table that came from our neighbor's existing table that we just repurposed for this. So if you already have that old table, you can still use it here, especially if it already matches your interior. But for the actual construction of the pedestal itself, this thing is going to be stout. Because Terran, they make a lot of axles, they're built really sturdy, and this is going to be a very similar construction to that. Which is important when you're driving down roads, especially those long drives where you get a lot of vibration. That can really cause a lot of wear and tear on anything inside your RV. So having this extra sturdy construction is going to go a long way. And the last feature I really wanted to hit on is how this table is going to be sitting on here. As you saw earlier, I slid this out a little bit away from us. I can also slide it away from myself too. So when I'm getting in here initially, it's just going to make it a little bit easier for me. Now, it's not going to be a lot, but it will be enough to make a difference. Now, speaking of that, actually, if you are trying to get in here and need to brace yourself with this table, this is going to move some. So to prevent that, there is going to be a lever at the bottom of it. So let's say I just have it here in the center. I flip that up. That's going to hold it into place, so it's no longer going to slide. This is going to hold itself and be just a little bit more stable for you to get in here. All in all, I'd say I'm a fan of this because this is going to offer you a lot. It's going to be just multi-purpose, so if you need a little bit more storage area, you can use it for that. You can turn it into a bed or use it as a table to eat on. Just having something that's multi-purpose in an RV or camper is just something that most people are looking for anyways. And what I do like a lot about is that you can use that existing table you have in here, because that's just usually going to be something that's going to match your interior a little bit better than trying to source something online. And speaking of that, we'll talk a little bit about how to source that original table and match it up with this pedestal. And we'll give you plenty of tips and tricks on how to install this, because one of the big concerns a lot of people have is how to install this on your slider, because you got to think about when this is coming back in, you want to make sure the hardware is going to scratch up the flooring in your RV. And we'll give you plenty of tips and tricks on how to avoid that. So at this point, we want to make sure we're getting our table all prepped up. So we're going to take our old table If you do have the old table, we're just going to be using the same hardware. I'm taking out these screws. I'm going to save them for later, just because we know it's going to be compatible with this one. Once we do that, then you just got to make sure you take all these out piece by piece. You won't need to keep them all, but it's better just to keep some extra on hand just to be safe. I want to make sure I grab my just the table stand itself. And we already removed the old table. If you don't have one there, then you don't have to worry about doing that. But now we have this clear space. I'd also recommend already sliding out your slider. It's going to help us a little bit more later on during this installation. But with this stand, I already have the spots marked out exactly where it's going to sit. So what I did was measure between these two seats. Once you have that measurement, then you just mark it out. As you can see, mine's right here. We did the same thing for the depth. So I meant from the wall all the way to the edge right here. Just sliding it over, making sure it's dead center. Once you have that location marked out, you'll notice we got these little yellow circles around here. That's going to be the markers for where the bracket sits. So I'll put this in there now, kind of show you. And a little tip that I like is whenever you put this stand in here, always make sure that this handle is facing out. It's not going to change up your measurements really. It's more so to make sure you don't accidentally install it the wrong way, because if this handle is facing the other way, it's going to be really hard to reach it whenever you need it. So that lines up now. What you could do too is just try to get that roughly centered up. Measure the length of the bracket on the bottom. So in my case, it's going to be around 10 inches. We'll subtract that from the total distance both ways, and just try to make sure if we have just about 16 inches on one side, it's going to be 16 inches on the other side. Same thing for the sides over here. Once everything is centered up, just grab some type of marker, whether it be a paint pen, pencil, and mark the ground, and then we can move over to the next step. Once you got all that old hardware off, or if you're using a new table, then you can just start getting going with this one. Now I already have all my spots marked out where exactly this is going to sit. I'll put it up there now so I can kind of tell you a little bit more about that. You'll see I took a pencil and I marked out everything. Now when you're doing this, I find the best way to get this measured out is notice how this will slide if I hold these down. And if you don't have them on the same position, it's going to be really hard to get an accurate measurement. So just slide it all the way to one side. And then just measure from either side, from the edge of that bracket all the way over to the edge of your table. Do that on the other side. Make sure it's squared off on both ends. And then we'll just do the same thing for the length of it. Make sure it's squared off. And once everything is looking pretty good, then just take a drill with a smaller bit and just make a light pilot hole. We're really not trying to drill through it. If I move this out of my way, you'll see that we have just a small indentation here. We're using a bit, typically a little bit less than 1/8 of an inch. So this is going to be enough to let us know where to drill. And speaking of that drilling, we can do that now. So you want to make sure you don't drill too far though. So in my case, that hardware that came from our table, I'm going to use that as a guide for my bit. I'm just going to see how that compares with the bit itself. And in my case, I'm using some blue painter's tape to kind of let me know where to stop. Now, if you're using new hardware, just make sure you measure the depth of your table. Go a little bit shorter from that. And then same thing, just kind of measure out where that's going to be on your bit. And then you can start drilling. And a little tip when you're doing this, let's say you accidentally got your measurement wrong. What we're going to do is just make sure our table is elevated so we're not drilling into the floor, and then just go from there. We're just going to keep a close eye on where that tape is. Stop about there. Look at it and make sure it didn't drill all the way through. And this is looking pretty good. We didn't go all the way through. And from there, you're just going to repeat that same process on the rest of the holes. Now to actually get that stand attached to the table, there will be a total of 8 of them. Now that we have all those holes drilled out, I got this back up here. I also want to do the same thing for a handle here. I'm just going to get that kind of roughly planned out. What I'm trying to take into consideration is where I want to grab this. There's a few things to think about, and that's going to be the placement. If you know you want it closer to one side, move to that one side. Me personally, I'm just going to keep it more centered up so I can grab it from either way. And at that point, it really just depends on how much you want that handle to stick out. Personally, I don't want it to stick out at all. Let it be completely under there, or I can just reach my hand a little bit underneath that table and grab it. Once I get it kind of marked out, I'll just take a drill or a pencil, mark out those 2 holes. And I already did that. I left a little tiny divot here. And since that divot is there, I still got that tape on my drill, and I can drill that out. Once you have everything kind of marked out, then we're just going to grab our drill. Right now I have a 1/8 inch bit on here, and I'm just going to drill through one of those. I'm going to start with the one closest to the wall, and we're going to go all the way through. And keep in mind that our slider's already out because we don't want to drill into our floor. And this one's already pretty much drilled. I just wanted to kind of show you how you would do this. It also helps if you have someone on the other side to kind of let you know once you're already through. But right now I can see daylight. And now I'm just going to take this bit out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the flat side of this bit through that hole and make sure someone's on the other side with a piece of wood, a metal block, whatever you have on hand to stop this. I'll put it through now. And once you kind of find resistance, then you just mark that with your thumb and pull it out. And this here is going to let you know how far you can go in. And then I just recommend grabbing some painter's tape to mark this off. And now that I got that tape on here, I'm going to just measure that out, find that distance, and we've got that distance now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I have a screw that's not longer than that. The reason being is because we don't want that screw poking through and then tearing up our flooring once that goes all the way through. So once you get that, then you just make sure it's a little bit thicker than the hole so it's going to grab onto that floor. We got all those holes drilled out now, and we can start attaching things. Now you could attach the base of the table to your floor. I think it's going to be a little bit easier to attach the table itself to the base. So we're going to start with that. I'm going to take some of that hardware that we came off of our table. Now if I find this isn't long enough, then I'm just going to go a step above this. If it's too long, then I might just use some washers to kind of space it out some. But let's see if it works. So I'm just going to take a screwdriver and put this into place. I'm not going to be using a drill because we might go too far. We could damage something. A screwdriver is going to be more than enough to get the job done, though. And for the handle, we're actually going to take a slightly different approach because this bracket here is pretty high, and it's going to lift up a decent amount. So to get a better hold, I'm going to get some longer screws, but they're a little long for my taste. So what I did was I'm going to put 2 small washers on here to give it enough of a gap so we have plenty of space to bite in there, but enough where it's not going to poke all the way through or bubble up on the other side. Now if your washers are just too large to fit into this gap, you could put them underneath here. Won't give you as good of a fit, so I'd recommend trying to find some smaller ones like this. Now I got my table in place, got lined up with those marks we made earlier, and I got the hardware to go along with it. This is going to be that same hardware that I measured out to make sure it's not going to be too long for this installation. And I got my screwdriver on hand. Again, I'm not going to be using a drill for this because it could tear up our ground since it is going to be a little bit softer, and this is going to be plenty for you. All right, we're going to start with that one we already made the pilot hole for, and we're going to just screw it into place. The reason why I'm starting with this one is it's going to let me have a good test to make sure this isn't going to be too far in. The rest of them I'm going to have a little bit of a different approach. I'll show you a little bit more what that looks like later on. But let's see how this sits first. So before we move over to those other holes, I'm actually going to come back out here and just check to make sure we have a good fit. Alright, so here's a hole right here. Now I already covered this up with some silicone, and you're going to want some sealant so no water or any type of thing from the outside gets inside your RV. Now, I noticed this one didn't come all the way through. If it did, I would have to come back through with some type of file or Dremel, kind of file that down some. So keep that in mind if yours is in that type of situation. And if it does go all the way through, for the other holes that we make or the other screws that we put in, we'll have to put on those silicone in those areas. But in my case today, since it doesn't go all the way through, we won't have to do that. All right, with those other holes, we're just going to use the same drill bit we used earlier. And this time, we're not going to go all the way through. We're just going to go a quarter of the way through this time. And then, once that's drilled through, you'll just use the same hardware we did on the other side to secure this down. So, I'll start now. And you're going to do this on all the other holes that are exposed right now. And after that, you're pretty much done with the installation. I just recommend a few things. So I wouldn't recommend rolling or sliding this back in yet because you want to make sure that silicone is going to properly dry. So just allow it enough time to dry, and then you can kind of test to make sure it's going to slide properly. Something else you'll notice, if you don't like the look of these bolts in place, I chose some stainless steel ones because it's going to be pretty easy to paint over. So if you're in a similar situation where you don't want that showing through, you can paint over it later with some type of black paint. But other than that, that'll pretty much do it for our look at the installation and some features of the Terran telescoping dining table. I'm Matt. Thanks for watching.